Okay, so let's continue with stage five. Yes, you know, uh, I don't know if you ever want to check it out, but where that stage five and stage four were at there, that Loire Atlantique region, the Brittany region going up in the Normandy, it's just beautiful. Um, in this video, I try to capture some of the images where you can see the coastline and there's some islands. You almost would think it's a tropical area, but yet here it is up close to the North Atlantic. Uh, there's also, it's pretty interesting. I tried to show it when I zoomed in a little bit there on the coastline at the beginning of stage five, the route, and you can kind of see they're hugging the coast. Literally, they were just off the beach, so maybe 100, 200 feet from the water. And you can see these two inlets in particular that look like they go back a good, half mile to a mile or so. And then you can see, well, if you do a little research, but when the tide goes out, the water level really drops. So boats that are maybe, in 3 or 4 feet of water or 5 feet of water, when the tide goes out, they just sit on the sand. And depending on the places where the tide really goes out, you could have a half a mile, 3/4 of a mile of sand be exposed. So if you wanted to go back to land, you'd be hoofing it on the sand for half a mile to get back to the actual continent of Europe and the actual country of France. Then if you blew it and the tide came in, you better be running because you're going to have 4 or 5 feet of water coming in on you. Anyway, so one thing to keep in mind too, I want to talk about it in another video from a historical point of view when Rome went in there and conquered the Celtic people. But Brittany is not really French. Those people consider themselves to be Bretons, and they're Celtic, and they're more akin to the Irish and the Welsh than they are to the French, the Gauls, or the Gaelic culture, or the Gallo-Roman culture that came in around 50 BC or so when Rome conquered that area. Anyway, it's a big shipbuilding region, and that ties into the pre-BC, pre-common era time frame when 50 BC, 100 BC, 150, 200 BC, they were seafarers in that Britain region, and they did trade with southern England. And for a while, these Breton people controlled the tin trade going all the way over there into, England and the southern and western side of England or Britain. So it's a big shipbuilding region. A lot of cruise ships to this day are built there. Just to the south there, Saint Nazaire, more in that Loire Atlantique region there, just south of Brittany. And the Germans built these massive subpens for World War II, where they're still there. They never were demolished because it would have just taken way too many explosives. These things are like 12, 15, 20 feet thick concrete with reinforced rebar. And the Allied bombing, they dropped bombs right on top of these subpens, and all it did is put 6 inch to 1 foot chips in these things. So they're still there, and the French use them just as part of their harbor. Anyway, you can see this stage five part of this. I'm showing the profile. You can see there's 2 category 4s and 3 category 3s, but it's really rolling terrain, very hilly. A lot of narrow roads, sort of rough roads, kind of grippy, not necessarily easy rolling resistance, but you can just see that whole Brittany region, very hilly. Lots of 150 to 250 to 300-meter hills or small mountains, depending on how you want to classify them. So Michael Matthews at the beginning of stage five, he's out, which is kind of too bad because he's one of those guys that could win on a stage like today. He's sick, something gastrointestinal, so he's out. The guy from the crash yesterday in that 5K from the finish, he broke his clavicle and he got a potential fracture to his temporal bone in his skull. So when people think that being a cyclist is for weenies, yeah, well, crash on a bike doing 20, 30, 40 miles an hour and break your clavicle and then fracture your skull, and not too weenie, if you know what I mean. Okay, so once again, the breakaway tried to do their thing, and they were brought back. And then there was a crash pretty early. Looked like a motorcycle went down with one of the cameramen on it, and then a rider went down. So one of the riders from Team Sky, but he got back onto the peloton, and a rider from Team Katusha, he went down, and he may or may not be out, but it looked like he was okay. Eventually, in the breakaway, once again, Sylvain Chavanel, he was out there in the breakaway, and then four crossed over from the peloton and joined him, and then another one or two came over. So there were six or seven in the breakaway, and at that point, the peloton basically settled down, and said, "Okay, this is it. We're going to settle in for the day," and that let the breakaway get a little bit of a gap. The breakaway got out there to about 45 seconds, and then it got up to about 1 minute 22 at 194 kilometers to go to the finish. So really early in the race, the breakaway finally got away, got established, 7 riders, including Sylvain Chavanel, the guy riding his 18th tour, and then it settled in, and the gap got up to 1 minute 22. So no one wanted to help Team BMC. And remember, Greg Van Avermaet from Team BMC, he's still in yellow. So they're having to do their job as the holder of the yellow jersey. They've got to be in charge of the peloton. So the thing that kind of sucks is, if you're Team BMC, you're there to help Richie Porte win. So this might come back to haunt them, the energy that they're expending to lead the peloton, because Greg Van Avermaet is in yellow. That might, haunt them a little bit. Even though it's a nice exposure for Team BMC and it's cool for Greg Van Avermaet to be in yellow, it's also putting pressure on them to have to set this pace. So they were kind of hoping the sprinter teams would come and help them, but nope, it was pretty much on BMC. And really, because the stage is so hilly, it's not ideal for the sprint teams anyway. Very few sprinters would be able to get through this kind of a stage and be in position to win. So they're basically saving their legs for a flatter stage. At 187 kilometers to go to the finish, the gap was up to 235 to that breakaway of 7. The king of the mountain potentially could change hands, because remember, most of the stages have been flat. So anybody who gets out there from the breakaway or from the peloton and is one of the first 1 or 2 or 3 riders over these 2 category 4 and 3 category 3 climbs, they're pretty much going to take the king of the mountain polka dot jersey from Dion Smith, the current holder. And then the overall stage win is at stake too, if you can stay out in front of the peloton long enough. At 177 kilometers to go, the gap was up to 3 minutes 18 seconds, and at 108 kilometers to go to the finish, the gap was 3:09, so it had come down a little bit. BMC still being forced to lead the peloton. At 162 kilometers to go to the finish, gap 3:23. Something to think about. 20,000 police officers work some aspect of the Tour de France. So, roadside security, the gendarme on the motorcycles. So 20,000 police officers, pretty wild. 158 kilometers to go, gap 3:43. 152 kilometers to go, gap 3:58. 149 kilometers to go, gap 3:38. So you can see, hovering right around 3.5, 4 minutes. 144 kilometers to go, gap up to 3:54. So the peloton clearly did not want to push it too much. Team BMC, doing so much work, clearly did not want to burn themselves out, but wanted to keep that breakaway at a reasonable distance. Greipel and Kittel, Marcel Kittel and Greipel, the 2 sprinters, one thing that's hurting them, they don't have anybody to help lead them out. They don't have like a pilot to help sort of bring them through the crowd at the end of these stages. So Marcel Kittel has had a great explosiveness at the end of the first few stages, but he's fallen short. And a lot of the reason is he needs to get himself closer to the front. Then, when he does his big kick, he really has a chance to blow everybody away and win. But particularly because he and Greibel do not have a set lead out pilot, they're having to do this on their own, and they're struggling this year. Although Greibel almost won yesterday. Mark Cavendish, he does have Renshaw as his pilot, but for some reason they're just off. Cavendish has not been there in the mix for any of these sprint finishes. 122 kilometers to go, gap 430. BMC still being forced to take that responsibility to lead the peloton. 104 kilometers to go, gap 403. So, Quick Step, the sprint team that has Gaviria, the guy who's won 2 stages, their team director apparently has, sort of spoken to the media and indicated they're pretty upset at the lack of help from the other sprinter teams. But really, in some ways, you can't blame those other sprint teams because they're trying to win. Why would they want to help Quickstep? Quickstep has a great sprinter. The guy's already won 2 stages. He's even had the yellow jersey. But from Quickstep's point of view, it's frustrating that they're constantly having to get out there and lead the peloton once it gets to the point where the sprinters and the sprint teams want to get up there and try to control things. So there are 99 kilometers. Now they're starting to get into the hills. So basically, because these are not really big hills, only 1 or 2 points are at stake or can be earned for the King of the Mountain. But still, because there's been so few hills to this point, if you're the first rider over a couple of these, you can pretty much get yourself into that King of the Mountain polka dot jersey. So Chavanel jumps out from the breakaway, potentially trying to win the stage or to get himself the King of the Mountain jersey. He got himself a good 25-30 seconds ahead of the other 5 or 6 riders in the breakaway. The peloton also started to get a little bit angsty because they don't want to crash. So guys in the peloton start pushing it when these roads start getting hilly and twisty and turning in the descents, because you want to be on that front side of the peloton controlling things and setting your pace rather than be trying to fight for a position, further back. And then there's more potential you're going to, crash or be affected by somebody crashing in front of you. Cavendish off the back of the peloton as soon as they start hitting these hills. And it was kind of unsure whether or not he was cracking and was really going to fall way back. But as soon as he would sort of reorganize himself, he would get back onto the back of the peloton, or in the descent, he would get back onto the back of the peloton. But clearly he is, just not looking really strong, even in these small hills. At one point, Craddock, the American who broke his scapula on day 1, was ahead of Cavendish. So this guy is actually climbing better than Cavendish. Eventually, though, Cavendish was not alone. Kittel fell back with him as they went over these Category 3 hills. And at one point, Cavendish, Kittel, and a group of another 10, 15, 20 riders were a good 5 or 6 minutes behind the peloton, which means they were 7, 8, 9 minutes behind the guys in the breakaway. But they were not necessarily in danger of being swept out of the course, but they were potential in that window. But they held on and kept it at that 7, 8, 9 minutes to the breakaway, which kept them in the race. 97 kilometers to go, gap 330. And Chavanel was only about 30, 35 seconds ahead of the rest of the riders in that breakaway. 92 kilometers to go. Chavanel got himself up 45 seconds in front of the breakaway and 3 minutes 55 seconds in front of the peloton. BMC, really now, they need to think about, do they want to give the yellow up and just let some other team get yellow, let them have the responsibility of controlling the peloton? So at this point to the race, which is down to about the last 80, 90 kilometers, BMC had done 65, 70% of the workload to lead the peloton. And the only other team that helped them was Bora, which is Peter Sagan's team. Because Peter Sagan, being more of an all-arounder, not a true mountain climber, but also not a true sprinter, he can actually do pretty well in these hills and this rolling kind of terrain, but yet still has the kick to finish strong and win this kind of a stage. So going over the category fours, Chavanel still in the lead, potentially getting the king of the mountain. The problem is the category threes are still coming, and those are going to be more points. Let's see here, 74 kilometers, gap is 3:30. Chavanel still in front, but the breakaway behind Chavanel splits, where Comminjon, the French rider, he jumped out trying to get up and get to Chavanel and then maybe even jump past Chavanel. That's about 68, 69 kilometers from the finish. So the thing that's kind of interesting is Warren Barguil. He's a French rider from Brittany. He's sort of the team leader for his team. So he's kind of upset because he's saying, well, now that I'm a team leader, I can't just freestyle. I have to I have to fulfill these expectations. I need to fulfill the role of the team leader. But the problem is he wants to freestyle. So then he says, well, I don't necessarily like the pressure and the expectations of being a team leader. But then he says, oh, but then if I, didn't have a team where I was the lead, then, I would be responsible to somebody else, and then I would be given instructions. So he's kind of talking himself into a circle. You can't have it both ways. So yeah, if you're the team leader, then there are responsibilities, and you need to fulfill those expectations. But that also means you can do what you want to do. So if you want to go on the attack, you can potentially do that, and the rest of the team has to help you, whether they like it or not. But if you blow it, then you have the responsibility and the accountability. Okay, so if you're just a domestique or you're just riding on a team, now you don't have any pressure, but now you have to do what you're told, which he doesn't necessarily want that, but then he doesn't want the expectations. So he's starting to get that, be careful what you wish for when you finally get to become more of a team lead, because now you may not like those expectations and accountability that are put on your shoulders. Okay, so 67 kilometers to go. Chavanel and Comminjon, they're up with him, and it's only a 3-minute gap to the peloton. And the chase is around 15 or 20 seconds behind him. And then going back to Cavendish is a minute or two behind that. Or I take it back, he's 7 minutes back. So he's it's 3 minutes to the peloton, but then he's another couple minutes behind the peloton. But like I was saying, at one point he dropped all the way back, and he was back 7, 8, 9 minutes behind the peloton. Okay, 60 kilometers to go, gap 2:31 to the peloton. It was not hot. The temperature, especially near the finish, was only about 78 to 79 degrees, so heat was not really a factor today. 54 kilometers to go, peloton plus 2:04. And then another 3 minutes back to Cavendish. 41 kilometers to go. He's 7 minutes down, Cavendish, with Kittel and about another those 10 or 12 riders. BMC and Bora each doing about 50% of the work. Comminjon and a guy Skolgens caught and actually passed Chavanel, so they took over the breakaway. And Skolgens jumped out and claimed those category 3 hills towards the finish. So he actually claimed the polka dot. So whatever Chavanel's plan was, maybe he intended to get King of the Mountain and that was a failure. Or maybe he just wanted to give it a try, but no big deal if it didn't happen. But clearly he probably thought he would have had the legs to get the polka dot, get the King of the Mountain, and then maybe even almost last to the finish. But probably from so much time in his previous breakaway, He just didn't have the legs. Common John caught him, and the Skolgens, and Skolgens got the King of the Mountain points from those category threes, so he got the King of the Mountain jersey. 18 kilometers to go, 45-second lead those front two. 13 kilometers to go, it was up to 24 seconds. So the peloton kind of whipsawing, not totally shutting it down. 12.4 kilometers to go, that gap was down to 14 seconds and then to 12. And by 12 kilometers to go, it was down to 10 seconds. So really dropping quickly. 12.2 kilometers to go, the gap was down to 5 seconds. So just in basically a tenth or two of a kilometer, the gap went from 10 seconds to 5 seconds. So they're shot, they're caught. Port, by this point in the last 6 or 7K, he lost most of his team. For some reason, the rest of Team BMC was not helping to protect him or pace him. And it was probably potentially because they were gassed from so much time doing 60-70% of the workload for that first 120 kilometers until finally Bora took about half of the workload. So Port was on Adam Yates's wheel and actually following Adam Yates. So hopefully that was just a little glitch. One of the Team Sky riders had a day like that in the team time trial where they got dropped about 2/3 of the way through the team time trial. So sometimes people just have a bad day. So maybe a couple of these guys from Team BMC kind of faded toward the end of stage 5. But Port did the right thing. He found another veteran and linked up with him. Sky then took over the peloton. And you figure there's two reasons why Sky did this, or I'm surmising. One is Geraint Thomas is only 3 seconds down on the yellow jersey. So if he can beat if he can beat that person by 3 seconds and or become, win the stage or come in, let's say, second place, just a couple feet back, Geraint Thomas potentially could get into yellow. So that would be a notch for Team Sky. And they don't necessarily have a problem having Geraint Thomas in yellow and having to control the peloton. They like to control the peloton. The other reason is just that they want to protect all the riders, but mainly Chris Froome. And so by Team Sky taking over the peloton, driving the pace, they prevent anybody else from setting the pace, and they keep themselves on the front so they can avoid crashes. It can be those following Team Sky that either will get dropped or will end up in a crash. 2 kilometers to go, really narrow roads, lot of hard switches, very fast. But then there's little uphill kicks. One, that's just the region of Brittany, but I think the race designers put that in there because if they came in too hard and too fast, there's potential that there would be another crash in the peloton. But by having a little bit of an uphill, it kind of forced everybody to taper it off. Basically, the last 100, 200 meters, 300 meters was uphill. So Greg Avamont was in there. A lot of the Sky guys were in there. Dan Martin was in there. Nibali was in there. Valverde was in there. But Peter Sagan, once again, Peter Sagan got a little bit of a lead out from his Bora teammates. And then just that strength that he has. There was a guy, Colbrelli. Colbrelli actually jumped first. He was there. He had a chance to win. But Peter Sagan caught him and notched him. Philippe Gilbert, he got third. And this was a kind of stage for Philippe Gilbert to potentially win, but he just fell a little bit short. Another rider that Julian, I believe is his first name, Alaphilippe, though. He's also kind of one of these Paris-Roubaix, Brittany, Rolling Hill, Category 3, Category 4 kind of riders. Julian Alaphilippe was there in the mix, but he fell short. So looking forward into stage 6 tomorrow, these are your potential winners. Philippe Gilbert, Alaphilippe, maybe even a guy like Alejandro Valverde, because he's kind of a savvy guy. Valverde was there at the end of stage 5 in the mix, but so were many of the other GC riders. And, Greg Avamat, Dan Martin, Vincenzo Nibali was in there. So that doesn't necessarily prove anything, but it shows that, these are the dangerous guys that might be there. Of course, Peter Sagan might do it again. So looking at the overall GC, Greg Van Avermaet still in yellow. TJ Van Garderen, his teammate, is 2 seconds behind. That's only because of the time bonuses that Van Avermaet got in stage 5 when he jumped out in front of the peloton to be the second rider over a couple areas on the race where you could get a time bonus. Philippe Gilbert, 3 seconds down to Greg Van Avermaet. Geraint Thomas, 5 seconds down. Alaphilippe, 6 seconds down. Youngles is 9 seconds down. Tom Dumoulin, 13 seconds down. Rigoberto Urán, 37 seconds down. Rafael Majka, 52 seconds down. So you can see just after that is Alejandro Valverde, Froome, and those guys around, 55, 57 seconds down. So everybody is still within striking distance, and people are going to be looking forward into stage 6. Okay, thanks.